I still remember the smirk on her face when she raised her glass. Not because the champagne was good, not because it was her birthday, but because she thought she was clever. "Everyone," she announced dramatically, gesturing toward me like a magician revealing her final trick. "This is Daniel. He's the one picking up the check tonight." The table roared with laughter. Lauren slapped the table, Jess leaned in with a wicked grin, and Megan covered her mouth like she was trying to hide her glee. Jess, ever the sharp-tongued commentator, tilted her head. "Oh, I get it. He's not your boyfriend. He's your portfolio, your walking, talking investment." The giggles overlapped, a chorus of polished cruelty. They thought they were humiliating me, that I'd blush, stammer, maybe protest. I didn't. I raised my own glass, smiled calmly, and said evenly, "To good investments." The words sounded like a toast, but inside, a demolition siren had gone off. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't wounded. I was already planning the teardown. Let's be clear, I don't bankroll women. I'm not a sponsor. I'm not a sugar anything. I'm a strategist. I'm a developer. My job is to look at something broken, undervalued, overlooked, and figure out how to extract its hidden value. Ashley wasn't a girlfriend. She was leverage. When I met her 6 months ago, she wasn't just a beautiful hostess in a downtown restaurant. She was a resident of a fortress I'd been trying to breach for years. The Halcyon, a pre-war 6-story apartment building with the perfect location and a fatal flaw. The tenants were locked in under rent control. They were paying pennies while the units were worth gold. Buying the property was easy. Getting it vacant? That was the unsolved million-dollar puzzle, until I discovered Ashley lived there. I didn't see her as a partner. I saw her as a key. My blueprint was simple. Phase 1. Infiltration. Date her. Be attentive, generous, strategic. Gather intel about the building, the broken heating system, the ignored repairs, the tenants whispering about buyouts. Phase 2. Acquisition. Use what I'd learned to pressure the weary landlord, structure an irresistible offer, and ensure he delivered the building empty. Phase 3. Liquidation. End things with Ashley, pay her a tidy sum for her rent-controlled unit, and walk away with the jewel I'd been after. It was business. Cold, clean, and professional. Until her little investment stunt at that dinner changed everything. Because that wasn't just rudeness. That wasn't just immaturity. That was exposure. She and her friends had just shown their cards. They thought I was a fool to be milked, a wallet to be passed around. They were wrong. That night, I quietly initiated a new plan. Hostile takeover. The champagne toast marked the start of demolition. When the bill came, $2,000 for the privilege of being insulted, I didn't hesitate. I placed my black card down, smiling as if it was nothing. Inside, I was already sharpening the wrecking ball. "You're right, Jess," I said casually as they scrolled through their phones, uploading photos I'd paid for. "I am a good investment. The best ones usually give you all the data you need." They blinked at me, confused. They thought I was just making a weird, clumsy joke. But the next morning, I began my audit. Ashley's power source was clear. Her apartment. A one-bedroom in the Halcyon for just $750 a month, when market rate was closer to $4,500. Her entire independence rested on that lease. And leases come with rules. Strict ones. I suspected she wasn't following them. So I did what I always do. I investigated. I called a PI I'd worked with before, gave him her name, her socials, her digital footprint. His task? Find proof she was violating her lease. While he dug, I turned to the landlord, Mr. Crawford, an old man, worn out by decades of tenant complaints and endless repairs. I drafted a new offer, a hefty all-cash sum, above market, with one condition: deliver the building vacant in 90 days. The risk shifted entirely to him. Meanwhile, I began pulling the financial rug out from under Ashley. Not all at once. That would spook her. Strategically. The credit card she used, limit reduced. The expensive restaurants she craved, replaced with quiet nights in. The little surprise gifts, gone. Her mood soured. She whined to her friends that I was being cheap. Perfect. Frustration breeds mistakes. And soon my PI delivered exactly what I needed. Less than 2 days later, he handed me a dossier that was pure dynamite. Ashley wasn't just living in her precious rent-controlled apartment, she was profiting off it. On weekends, when she stayed with me, she and Jess had been renting the unit out on Airbnb, a clear, blatant violation of rent control law, illegal, unforgivable in the eyes of any landlord. The PI's evidence was airtight. Screenshots of listings, glowing reviews, and even payment histories. Venmo notes that read "Halcyon Weekend" with little emojis. It was more than a crack in her foundation. It was collapse-level weakness. Now, the only question was, how would I use it? I had options. Loud confrontation with Mr. Crawford, a direct handover of the PI's dossier to the city, or something surgical, a targeted nudge that would force his hand without exposing me. I chose the surgical route. I wrote an anonymous letter, precise, alarm-raising, and legally persuasive. It described late-night strangers coming and going, party noise, and linked to a few of the Airbnb listings the PI had archived. I used a tenant's voice and sprinkled in language that would set off every landlord's worst fear: liability, insurance headaches, and inspections. Then I slipped the envelope into my briefcase and shelved it. It was leverage. I wasn't ready to deploy it as a public weapon until the framework was in place. Next, I invited Mr. Crawford to a cafe and presented a new offer. All cash. Above the numbers the market expected for a building with decades of deferred maintenance. 90 days to vacancy. No negotiations. He stared at the figure like a man seeing light through a fog. "You can't get them out in 90 days, he said. "They know the law. They drag you into court, and they win. You could try," I said, "or you could accept help. I have counsel who will handle the eviction for you. Surgically targeted, legally airtight. If one tenant is proven to be illegally subletting, others begin to worry. They take buyouts to avoid trouble." He read the anonymous complaint I'd pushed across the table. His tired face tightened. The listing screenshots and the Venmo records were small and damning. When he asked for more time, I didn't budge. Within an hour we had a handshake and signatures in the lawyer's office. The next morning, the notice arrived. Cure or quit. A formal demand to remedy a lease violation or vacate. For most violations there's a path to cure. Not for fraud. You cannot unsell a dozen nights of rental income. The notice landed like a guillotine. Ashley called me in a panic. Her voice was high and brittle. "Who would do this? Who sent it?" she said between sobs. I kept my voice controlled, a studio actor playing concern. "Someone who cares about the building," I answered. "Someone who doesn't want it turned into a boarding house." She begged. She pleaded. She tried to blame neighbors, to accuse a feud she imagined. I listened, then offered the one spoonful of comfort I'd allowed myself in this operation. There are lawyers who can help. But these things move fast. If my goal was to destabilize her, the next step was to remove her supports, the people she relied on to prop up her lifestyle and her smug sense of invulnerability. That meant her friends. Jess, the mastermind behind the weekend listings, had a budding career in real estate. I fed her employer a careful dossier. No names, just evidence. A license number, transaction screenshots, screenshots of violations tied to a brokerage agent's social handle. Compliance departments hate uncertainty. Within days, she sat across from her managing broker while HR documented the cause. She walked out with her box of things and a terminated email chain. Lauren and Megan were more fragile targets, image-driven, dependent on introductions and curated press. A whisper campaign, seeded through a third-party PR consultant who owed me a favor, suggested a scandal of association, that proximity to a known rent scam and fired agent could be toxic to their brands. Invitations evaporated. Collaboration offers dried up. Small industries are cruel in that way. Reputations calcify from rumor faster than they can be cleaned with truth. The dominoes fell on schedule. One tenant's legal peril became the wedge the landlord used to pressure others. Offers of buyouts, generous and carefully timed, began to appear. People who once refused to move for anything suddenly found the sum attractive compared to the risk of drawn-out legal bills and a public court fight. 2 weeks in, Ashley's world had narrowed to a phone and a series of urgent messages she did not know how to answer. My messages to her were neutral, even-handed. I wasn't cruel in speech. Cruelty is messy. My cruelty was efficiency. Legal notices, counsel, and the marketplace doing what it always does, repricing risk. When Mr. Crawford's attorney called to confirm he would proceed with eviction if she did not vacate, Ashley finally admitted defeat. She accepted a buyout, a small, humiliating sum that would barely license her to start over. It was the market's arithmetic. The building's value surged with vacancy, her leverage evaporated with the evidence. On moving day, I arrived to oversee the final walkthrough. There was no need for theatrics. This was business. Mr. Crawford and I walked the halls while crews measured windows and discussed demolition plans. She appeared at the lobby with 2 boxes and a face stripped raw by shock. Recognition flooded her features when our eyes met. "You did this," she whispered, "the accusation a live thing. You ruined me." "Your choices did most of the work," I said. "You treated me like a ledger. You and your friends gambled on other people's money and lost." She flinched at the bluntness, then sobbed. I watched a life fold into a single cardboard box and understood how small and precise the sum of causes had to be to topple someone who had thought herself invulnerable. We signed papers that afternoon. The building changed hands. The crews moved in the next morning. Offers to the remaining tenants were accepted with varying degrees of relief and anger, and then they left. I drove away with the title in a sealed envelope and the knowledge that a complex operation, executed with patience and surgical pressure, had unfolded exactly as I'd modeled it. Business, in the end, is reconfiguration. You find weak points, apply force, and the structure rearranges itself. But as the halcyon scaffolding swallowed its silhouette, a quieter question began to form. One that money and contracts do not always answer. What happens when you flip a life like property? What collateral remains? I'd told myself I was not a monster. I had justified every move by market logic. But watching her disappear down the street with a single box, the taste of victory felt considerably more complicated. I grew up in a household where silence was louder than any scream. My parents never said it out loud, but I always felt like an afterthought. The attention, the praise, the celebrations, those were all reserved for my twin sister. She was the golden child, the one they bragged about at family gatherings, while I was the extra piece that didn't quite fit into their picture-perfect puzzle. They would buy her gifts, throw her parties, and make sure she always had the best of everything. Me? I was there, existing, but never truly seen. It became painfully clear as we grew older. When she achieved something, it was a family victory. When I did, it was brushed aside like it didn't matter. I could have climbed mountains or solved impossible problems, and it still wouldn't have been enough. She was their pride, and I was the shadow that lingered in the background. The worst part wasn't just their neglect. It was the way they made me feel like I should be grateful for scraps. A pat on the shoulder if I brought home good grades, a half-hearted, "That's nice," when I tried to share my accomplishments. They didn't see me as someone who mattered. They saw me as the reminder of what they didn't want. By the time I was 16, I wasn't just invisible. I was disposable. My twin got pregnant, and instead of holding her accountable, they turned their anger on me. Somehow, I became the problem, the one they needed to get rid of. They told me to leave, as if throwing me out would solve everything. No warnings, no second chances, just a cold dismissal. I remember standing on the doorstep with a single bag of clothes, realizing that I had no home anymore. The people who were supposed to protect me had chosen to abandon me instead. My sister stayed, her mistakes excused, while I was cast aside like I never belonged in the first place. That night, as I walked away from the only house I'd ever known, I promised myself I would never go back. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was more than what they believed me to be, that their rejection didn't define me, and, as painful as it was, their betrayal became the fire that pushed me forward. At first, I had nothing. No money, no place to stay, no idea what tomorrow would look like, but what I did have was a determination that burned hotter than any fear. Nights were spent sleeping on friends' couches, sometimes even on park benches when I had nowhere else to go. Hunger gnawed at me, and uncertainty weighed on me, but there was also a strange kind of freedom in it. For the first time, I wasn't living in anyone's shadow. I was free to fail, free to rise, free to create my own path. I worked whatever jobs I could find, washing dishes in a diner, sweeping floors in a convenience store, hauling boxes in a warehouse. I didn't care what it was, as long as it put a little food in my stomach. I learned to stretch every dollar, to survive on the bare minimum, and to push myself harder than anyone else around me. While my peers were busy complaining about homework, I was learning what it meant to truly fight for survival. And in that fight, I discovered something my parents could never take from me: resilience. Every night I went to bed exhausted, but every morning I woke up a little stronger. I started reading books from the library, studying late into the night, teaching myself skills that no one thought I could learn. If life wasn't going to hand me opportunities, I was going to build them with my own hands. Still, the memories of my parents haunted me. Their words, their indifference, the way they pushed me out. It all stayed with me like scars under the skin. But instead of breaking me, it fueled me. I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to become someone so unshakable, so undeniably successful, that they would have no choice but to recognize what they lost when they let me go. Years passed, and slowly things began to change. I found better jobs, saved money, and built a life piece by piece. I didn't just survive, I grew. I learned how to navigate the world on my own terms. I learned that family isn't always the people you're born to. It's the people who stand by you, who believe in you, who see your worth even when you can't. But just when I thought I had finally left that past behind me, a message arrived. It was from my sister, the same sister who was sheltered, protected, and handed everything while I was thrown away. Her words were desperate, pleading. Life hadn't gone the way she expected. She and her child needed a place to stay. And suddenly, the family that had cast me aside was looking to me for salvation. The irony hit me like a storm. The unwanted twin, the forgotten child, the disposable one, they wanted me to open my door, to save them. I stared at that message for a long time, my hands trembling as I held the phone. Memories I thought I had buried came flooding back. Every cold glance, every dismissive word, every moment I was reminded that I didn't belong. And now, the same people who had discarded me were suddenly treating me like their last hope. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Another part wanted to scream, to finally say everything I had swallowed for years. But more than anything, I felt the weight of a choice pressing down on me. Did I owe them anything? Did I owe her anything? I thought about the nights I spent hungry while she sat at a dinner table I wasn't invited to. I thought about the comfort she received, the second chances, the love poured into her while I was pushed further into the shadows. And I thought about the moment they threw me out, like garbage left on the curb. But I also thought about the person I had become since then. Stronger, wiser, capable of standing on my own. They had tried to break me, and yet here I was, not just standing, but thriving. And for the first time I realized something. They needed me more than I ever needed them. When I finally responded, my words were careful, deliberate. I wasn't the scared 16-year-old anymore, desperate for approval. I was the one in control. And whether I opened my door or not, one truth was undeniable. I had already won. Because the forgotten twin, the outcast, the one they didn't want, had built a life worth fighting for. And no matter what decision I made about them, that victory was mine alone.